always thought the loudest sound in my house was my husband's laugh. Turns out, it was the silence after he died. You don't really notice how much noise somebody carries with them till they're gone. My Earl had a whole orchestra, keys jingling, boots on the floor, the way he'd clear his throat when he didn't like what the preacher was saying, the half hum he did under his breath reading the sports page. When he was alive, I sometimes wished he'd hush for 5 minutes so I could hear myself think. After the funeral, I would have given just about anything to hear one more off-key whistle down the hallway. Those first months, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt suspicious, like it knew something I didn't. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like somebody leaving. Every time the ice maker dropped a cube, my heart jumped and then settled, disappointed. People brought casseroles and sympathy. They sat on my couch and patted my hand and told me I was strong, as if strength is something you either wake up with or don't, instead of something you claw together from coffee grounds and clean socks. They went home. I stayed. Life shrank. My world became the path from my bed to the bathroom, to the kitchen, to the recliner, and back again. I did the practical things. I called the bank. I called the lawyer. I went to the Social Security office and took a number and felt like I was standing in line to pick up a stranger's life in a paper bag. I boxed up his clothes in stages. First, the shirts I hated, the ones with stains he swore were character. Then the old work jeans. I kept the church suit hanging in the closet like a sentinel. There were some things I couldn't touch. His old leather chair, his toolbox, still smelling like oil and sweat, the drawer in the nightstand on his side of the bed. Earl was not a secretive man, far as I knew. He'd leave receipts laying on the counter, phone on the armrest, not a lock on anything. But that drawer had always been his. Everybody needs one space, he'd say, patting it. A little island. You got your pantry, I got my drawer. I'd laughed and let it be. In 35 years of marriage, I'd opened it maybe twice, looking for a pen. Saw pocket knives, loose change, old ticket stubs. Nothing sinister, nothing interesting. After he died, it started to take on weight. I'd walk past his side of the bed and feel it, like a closed mouth. I'd tell myself, it's just rubber bands and receipts. Then I'd think about all the stories you hear widows finding secret bank accounts, secret families, secret failings. My mind is an imaginative creature when left unsupervised. I wasn't afraid of finding out he'd had some wild double life. Earl was too tired after work to have one life, bless him, much less two. What I was afraid of was finding his grief. Because here's the truth nobody tells you when you're widowed. You're not just mourning the person. You're mourning your own version of the story. You wonder what parts you missed, what parts you got wrong, what parts they chose not to tell you because they were trying to protect you or themselves. I didn't know, sitting there with my coffee and my quiet, that the answers to those questions were 15 inches away from my pillow, in a spiral-bound notebook with a blue cover, inside that nightstand drawer. The day I finally opened, it wasn't special. There was no thunder, no mysterious wind, just a Tuesday. I'd gone to the grocery store, managed not to cry in the cereal aisle when I passed his favorite cornflakes, and came home to find the house smelling like dish soap and fabric softener because I'd left the dryer sheet box open. I put the milk away. I took off my shoes. I looked at our bed. The afternoon light was slanting across his side, dust motes dancing like they had nothing better to do. Something in me just snapped. I live here, I said out loud to nobody. This is my house. That is my furniture. That's my grief. And that is my drawer now. I marched around the bed before I could talk myself out of it and sat down on his side. The mattress dipped differently. He'd always had a heavier presence. Even without him, the indent was there. hovered over the drawer handle a second, hating how dramatic I was being, but unable to change it. Then I pulled. The drawer slid open with a familiar little shush. On top was what I expected: loose change, old receipts, a pocket knife with his initials, a church bulletin with the pastor's sermon notes scribbled all over it. Earl liked adding his commentary in the margins. Underneath those lay a blue, college-ruled spiral notebook, the kind you buy for 99 cents when school starts. No label on the front, just a little stain in the corner like he'd set his coffee mug on it once. My heart thudded. Please just be lottery numbers, I muttered, even though he'd never played. I picked it up. It fell open in my lap to the middle. My eyes went straight to my name. June woke up crying again, it said, in his blocky, familiar handwriting. She thinks I don't hear, but I do. I don't know how to hold that kind of sadness without breaking it more. The room tilted a little. I read the line again. June woke up crying again. I hadn't known he'd noticed. I tried so hard to be quiet, to let him sleep, to keep my grief polite. I flipped back a few pages. The dates at the top stopped me cold. 2 years before he died. He'd written the date on almost every page, neat in the corner. This wasn't a notebook of random grocery lists or work notes. This was a journal, Earl's journal. Lord help me, I whispered. I had a choice right there. I could close the cover, put it back, and pretend I'd never seen my name on that page. I could tell myself, he's gone. Whatever he wrote in here was for him, not for me. Let the dead keep their thoughts. Or I could read it. I could read it and risk finding out that the man I'd shared a bed and a bank account and a mortgage with for most of my life had whole continents inside him I'd never visited. I sat there and waited, the notebook heavy in my lap. Finally, I thought, he left it in the top of the drawer, not buried in the attic, not in a safe deposit box, not burned in the fire pit. Sometimes, the way someone leaves something tells you how badly they want it found. He knew me. He knew I'm a snoop with a conscience. He knew curiosity would eat me alive. I think, in his own quiet, messy way, he left me a map. I took a breath. All right, old man, I said softly. Let's see what you thought you couldn't say out loud. And I turned to the first page. The first entry was dated exactly 2 years before the heart attack that took him. January 5, he'd written. Doctor says my heart's working too hard for what it's got to work with. I told him that's the story of my life. I smiled, tears already pricking. That's him, I murmured. He went on. Gave me pills, gave me papers, gave me that look like I got one foot on a banana peel and the other in the grave. I nodded, said I'd cut back on bacon. Came home, ate 3 slices. June fussed. She's scared, my name again. She pretends she's mad, he'd written. That's how she holds her fear. If I die on her, I hope she knows I knew that. The words blurred. I pressed the heel of my hand to my chest. Nobody prepared me for this, I whispered. Learnin' what somebody thought after they're gone. It's one thing to remember what they said. It's another to see what they didn't. I read on. He wrote about little things. The exact way the couch squeaked when he sat down. Way the air tasted after a thunderstorm. The way our grandson's hair smelled like grass and syrup. He wrote about the big things too, but he did it sideways. June's mad at our son again, he wrote in March. He asked about the will at dinner. I wanted to choke him with his own napkin, but I kept cutting my steak. June did that thing where her eyes go flat and her smile gets tight. She learned it from her mama. I wish I'd said something in the moment besides, pass the salt. I remembered that dinner. I remembered feeling betrayed, cornered, like my heart had been put on a scale and found wanton. I also remembered thinking Earl had taken his boy's side by saying nothing. Turns out, silence had been its own kind of pain. I flipped forward. I found entries about his work, about his resentment after the plant closed early, and he lost his job 2 years before retirement. Everybody says, "At least you got your health," he'd written. Now I don't even have that without pills. I feel like a car left up on blocks in the front yard. Engine still humming, nowhere to go. I don't tell June all of that. She's already carrying enough. That stung. Because from where I'd sat, he'd seemed resigned. Fine, even, like he was enjoying the forced rest. I'd had no idea he was written metaphors in the dark. At the bottom of one page, in smaller letters, he'd added, "Sometimes I wish I could hand her my insides for 10 minutes, just so she'd know it's not her fault when I stare at the wall. But that seems like a mean gift." I closed the notebook for a second, my hands trembling. Who was this man who'd given my husband a poet's pen and not told me? I thought I knew his weaknesses, his strengths, his habits, the way he'd leave cabinet doors open, the way he'd forget where he put his keys, way he'd avoid hard conversations by talking about the weather. Turns out, the weather had been a stand-in for what he really wanted to say. Rain meant I'm sad. Sun meant I'm scared but hopeful. Storms meant I'm angry and don't know where to put it. A whole dictionary I never looked up. The first real punch to the gut came about a quarter of the way in. April 22, he'd written. Anniversary tomorrow. 35 years. I want to tell June I'm sorry about that year I checked out when my mama died. Not the checked out like suitcases, the checked out like lights off. I was in the house, but I wasn't in the room. She asked me to go to counseling. I laughed it off. I thought it was weakness. Now I see it was her asking me to come home to my own life. I remembered that year, how he'd moved around the house like a shadow, how I'd done the work of 2 people, emotionally and physically. I'd gone to a counselor by myself because he refused, how I'd secretly resented him for not showing up. I see her now, he wrote. How tired she must have been, how small she must have felt, standing at the sink, talking to my back. If I could go back, I'd go sit on that little green couch with her in that lady's office and say, "Help me love my wife better." But I can't. So I write it here where she might never see it. Cowardly, maybe, but it's something. I put the notebook down and went to the sink. My legs needed the distance. I stared out the window at the same yard I'd stared at that year, watching the same oak tree, hearing the same drag of the same train in the distance. Back then, I told myself a story. The story was, he doesn't care enough to try. Now I was holding proof that the story was more complicated. He'd cared. He'd just been lost, prideful, scared. It didn't erase the years I'd felt alone, but it did soften the edges around his silhouette in those memories. I went back to the bed. "This is why widows drink," I muttered, then snorted at myself. "I don't even like wine. Gives me a headache." I picked up the notebook again, and I kept reading. Not every page was heavy. There were entries that made me laugh out loud, tears running down my face for a different reason. "Note to self," he wrote once. "Do not argue with June about the proper way to load a dishwasher. She has a system. Systems in marriage are not to be messed with without a signed permission slip." On another day, grandkids over today. House looks like a toy store threw up. June pretends to be annoyed. She's lying. She loves it. I love watching her love it. He wrote about my laugh. "June laughed so hard at that dumb TV show tonight she nearly fell off the couch," he wrote. "That sound is what I imagine heaven sounds like if they have good sense." I pressed the page to my chest. He wrote about my body in ways I'd never imagined he'd put in ink. Nothing nasty, just tender. "Her hands are softer now," he wrote once. "More spots, more veins. I love them more. They've held babies, casseroles me. They've done more work than any hands I know. I want to tell her that without macking her think I'm calling her old." I shook my head. "You idiot," I whispered to the empty room. "You should have told me. I'd have taken that insult." course he hadn't. And his age were taught that talkin' about feelings was like wearing someone else's underwear. Wrong. Embarrassin'. So he'd written it down instead, for himself, for God, maybe, just maybe, for me someday. Then came the entry that cracked something wide open in me. November 3, he'd written, the year before he died. Fight with June tonight about the house deed. David came over again, pushin' about mackin', sure the estate is efficient. Code for I want my name on things. I saw the hurt in her face when he said, well, you're not gonna need it forever. I should have taken him outside. I didn't. I froze. I remembered that night like it was etched in my bones, our son standin' in my kitchen talkin' about asset transfer like I was a filing cabinet. I'd felt like furniture, like something to be managed. I'd been mad at both of them. At David for saying it, at Earl for not throwing him out. I tried to make a joke. Earl's entry went on. Told him, your mama's gonna outlive us all, boy. You better be nice to the landlord. He laughed, but it didn't land. June looked at me like, say more. I said less. Later, in bed, she turned her back. I lay there thinking about the deed. My breath hitched. I want to put the house fully in her name while I can, he'd written. Not so the kids don't get it someday. They will. But so she knows, in no uncertain terms, that this roof is hers as long as she wants it. She grew up in a house that could be taken from her daddy's bad decisions at any minute. I don't want that ghost following her into old age. I slapped my hand over my mouth. We had that fight. About the deed. About our son. About security. About fear. I'd begged him to go to the lawyer. He said, we'll get around to it. We hadn't. And after he died, I'd had to sit in that same lawyer's office and argue with my own child over paperwork and promises. I'd blamed Earl for not taking care of it when he could. Now I read, at the bottom of the page, in smaller letters, called Mr. Walker, the lawyer, this afternoon. Set appointment for next month to change deed. Didn't tell June. Wanted to surprise her on Christmas. Put the papers in a card. Felt kinda romantic about it. If I drop dead before then, I hope she knows I tried. I dropped the notebook. Literally. It slid off my lap onto the carpet, pages fanned. I stared at it like it had bitten me. He had tried. He had made the call. He'd planned the Christmas surprise. Then his heart had given out in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot a week before Thanksgiving, and the paperwork had never been signed. All this time, I'd been carrying anger I thought was righteous. He left me in a mess, I'd said to Leela more than once. He had time. He chose not to, but the truth was messier. He had chosen to. Time had chosen otherwise. My anger, I realized, had been aimed partly at the wrong target. Less at him, more at the randomness of life. For the first time in months, I let myself feel sorrow for him, not just for me. For the list of things he meant to do and didn't get to. For the conversations he'd planned in his head and never had. For the gifts he'd wrapped in his mind and never gave. I picked up the notebook with shaking hands. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm sorry I cursed your name in that lawyer's office. I'm sorry I thought you didn't care enough to make that call. You did. It just didn't land in time. Tears dripped onto the page, blurring the ink a little. I wiped them gently, like I was afraid of harassing him. By the time I reached the last third of the notebook, my heart felt like it had been wrung out and hung up to dry. I put it down and picked it up so many times I lost count. Some days, I'd read 2 pages and have to go for a walk. Other days, I'd curl up in his chair with a blanket and read 10, letting his voice in those lines be the company I'd been missing. I learned things I'd never thought to ask. That he'd almost backed out of our wedding, not because he didn't love me, but because he was so afraid of turning into his daddy, angry, drunk, absent, that he thought the kindest thing he could do for me was disappear. Then she walked down the aisle he'd written, and I If I run, I'll spend the rest of my life chasing this moment and never catching it. So I stayed. Best foolish decision I ever made. I learned he'd kept track of my birthdays in that notebook, not just the dates, but the way I'd aged in his eyes. 52 today, he wrote once. Lines deeper, laugh louder, more beautiful. I don't say that because I don't want her to think I'm buttering her up for something. Maybe I should. Maybe I'm robbing her of the truth to protect myself from looking sappy. I learned he'd worried about our son's temper, our daughter's sadness, my tendency to carry everybody else's load like it was my job. I wish I could build June a smaller cart, he wrote. She thinks she has to pull all of us. I want to tell her it's okay to sit down. I don't know how to say that without sounding like I'm calling her dramatic. I laughed, even as my throat closed. I am dramatic, I told the notebook. You married me, that's on you. He'd written about his faith in such a raw way it startled me. Preacher talked about heaven like it's a retirement home with better music, he wrote once. I hope if there is one, it's more like June's kitchen. Messy, loud, people coming in and out. Food on the stove, not just on a table once a week. At the top of the last page he'd written on, just a few weeks before he died, was a sentence that changed me. If I don't wake up tomorrow, he wrote, I hope June doesn't spend the rest of her life thinking I was happier than I really was or sadder than I really was. I hope she knows I was both lucky and scared. I hope she knows she was the best thing I ever got right. That was it. No big revelation of a secret affair. No hidden fortune. No confession that our life had been a lie. Just a man trying to make sense of his own heart in ink. Given me, without meaning to, permission to make sense of mine. Reading that journal didn't just teach me about him. It held up a mirror to me too. I started to see all the places I'd assumed instead of asking. All the ways I'd decided what he must be thinking without giving him room to say it wrong first. We'd had patterns. Every long marriage does. He'd shut down when he was overwhelmed. I'd ramp up. He'd joke when things got serious. I'd get offended. We'd both retreat to our corners, lick our wounds, then come back together over TV and pie, pretending the fight had finished itself. In his pages, I saw my own outlines. June did that thing with her jaw, he'd write. That means I hit a nerve. I wish I knew how to ask which one without her thinking I'm using it against her. I thought about all the times I'd rolled my eyes instead of explaining. All the you should know S, and if you loved me you'd understand S I'd thrown like little darts, forgetting that nobody, not even a man who sees you in your nightgown, can read your mind. The journal made me mad at him, then mad at myself, then softer on both of us. We'd been two people trying to build a life with the tools we'd been given. Half a set, really. Mamas who talked around things. Daddies who drank instead of feeling. Churches that told us to pray away what needed to be talked through. We'd done all right, considering. But I couldn't help thinking, if I'd known he was written all this, would I have asked to read it then? Would I have sat on the couch with him and said, tell me the part you don't know how to say out loud yet. I promise not to run. I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd had the chance. Part of me thinks he could only be this honest in the presence of paper. Humans can be too much audience. Ink is quiet. It doesn't flinch. It wasn't all comfort. There were entries that stung, that made me put the notebook down and go outside to pull weeds like they were responsible. One in particular still sits in my chest like a pebble. June can be unforgiving, he wrote once. Not in the big ways. If I did something dramatic, she'd probably come bail me out of jail and lecture me all the way home. But in the small ways, she remembers every sharp word, every time I came home late without calling, every grocery item I forgot. She keeps a list, even if she doesn't mean to. I wish I could help her set it down. I bristled when I read it. Unforgiving. unforgiving, I said out loud. I stayed when your daddy said we wouldn't last. I stayed through layoffs and your depression and your snoring. I forgave a lot. But when I sat with it, I saw what he meant. I do keep lists in my head. Every hurt, every slight, every you always and you never. I file them away, just in case I need evidence later. It's a habit I learned from my mama, who learned it from hers. It's a way of protecting yourself without having to say, that hurt me in the moment. But it also means the people you love are always walking through your house under the weight of invisible charges. Weighed, measured, sometimes found wanton. I sat in my quiet kitchen and thought about how it must have felt to live with that. To know that one wrong word could bring a whole file cabinet crashing down. He'd written it once. Sometimes I don't bring things up because I don't want to add to her list, he wrote. I know that's not fair to either of us. I just don't know how to empty it, so I try not to add more. I cried hard on that one, not just for him, for me, for the years I'd spent holding onto proofs instead of reaching for repair. His journal didn't shame me. It invited me to do different, with my kids, with my sister, with myself. Notice when I start macking mental tallies and ask, can I set this down instead of loading it, to say, in real time, that hurt, instead of letting it calcify. It's a lesson I'm still learning, but it came from a man who'd written it for himself, and I'm grateful he let me borrow it. The emotional peak snuck up on me. It wasn't the entry about the will. It wasn't the one about his mama dying. It wasn't even the last page. It was a paragraph in the middle of a mundane day. June asked me today, was I enough? He wrote. She said it like a joke, stirring her spaghetti sauce, but I heard the crack under it. I made some dumb comment about how no man's stomach is ever truly satisfied, trying to lighten the mood. She laughed, punched my arm, moved on, but I could tell she was still listening for a real answer. I winced. I remembered that question. We'd been watching some show where a man left his wife for a younger woman. I'd made a comment. He said something exaggerated about how ridiculous that was. I'd stirred my sauce and said, half teasing, you ever feel like you missed out? That you settled? It had been half joke, half fear. The fear most women I know have but rarely say. Am I enough? Enough pretty? Enough interesting? Enough kind? Enough? I wanted to say so many things, he went on, that she could never be reduced to enough or not enough. That she is the measure, not the other way around. That if I have regrets in this life, they sure as hell are not about her. That if I had to live my whole life in that little house with just her voice and her biscuits and her occasional storms, I'd sign up again. He'd underlined that last part twice. I didn't say it, he wrote, because I was embarrassed, because my daddy never said things like that to my mama, and it felt weak. So I made a joke, kissed her cheek, and we watched TV. Maybe I'll say it someday, if my heart holds out. I put the book down and sobbed. Not dainty tears, ugly, red-faced, snotty sobs. I cried for the woman stirring spaghetti who'd gone to bed that night still wondering if she was a consolation prize. I cried for the man sitting on the couch who'd kept his love folded up like a letter he never mailed. I cried for all the times in our marriage we'd circled the truth and never landed. For all the almost conversations. For the ways we'd both been watching the same scene with different subtitles. When I ran out of tears, I sat there, hiccuping, and thought, if he had told me that then, my life would have been easier. If I had heard that, maybe I would have been less harsh with myself in the mirror, less quick to assume I was the problem when things went wrong. But also, if I hadn't read it now, I might have gone to my grave carrying that question mark. Instead, even though it came late, I had his answer. I wrote it down on a sticky note and stuck it on my bathroom mirror. You are not enough or not enough. You are the measure. I see it every morning when I'm patting my hair and checking my teeth. Some days I believe it, some days I don't. But I hear his pencil scratching behind it. And on the days I can't hold that belief for myself, I borrow his. After I finished the last page, I sat there for a long time, notebook closed in my lap. I felt like I had a new ghost in the house, not the kind that rattles chains, the kind that sits in a chair and listens. I thought about what to do with it. Part of me wanted to hide it, to tuck it back in the drawer like he had, and let it be our secret. Another part of me knew I wasn't the only one who'd been living in that marriage. Our kids had. Not in the bed, thank the Lord, but in the house. Under the same roof, shaped by two people trying their best and failing more often than they wanted to admit. They'd seen the fights, the silences, the reconciliations, the laughter. They had their own stories of us. What right did I have to let them walk around with half a picture if there was a way to give them more? On the other hand, did they need to know everything? Did they need to read their daddy's most private thoughts? Did they need to see where he doubted himself as a father, as a husband, as a man? Did they need to see where he'd written their names and worried he'd mess them up? I wrestled. I carried the notebook with me like a purse for a week, picking it up, putting it down, touching it like a talisman. Finally, one Sunday after church, my daughter Lee stayed behind to help me with dishes. Her brother had darted out to meet friends. Sunlight poured in through the kitchen window. The house smelled like roast and lemon pledge. I decided, "Baby," I said, rinsing a plate, "there's something I need to show you about your daddy." She froze, hands in the soapy water. "Is it bad?" she asked. "No," I said quickly. "Not bad, hard maybe, but good too. It's him, on paper." Dried her hands and turned to me, brows knit. "What do you mean?" she asked. I wiped mine and went to the bedroom. I came back with the notebook, set it on the table. Her face changed when she saw his handwriting on the first page. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, Mama, I found it in his drawer," I said, "couple weeks ago. I've read it, all of it," she swallowed. "What is it?" she asked. "It's a journal," I said. 2 years of him thinking on paper. About his health, about work, about me, about y'all, God, about life." Her eyes filled. "You read it?" she asked. "You felt okay reading it?" I smiled sadly. "Okay isn't the word I'd use," I said, "but I did. And I'm glad I did. I think he left it for me." She sat down slowly. "Do you want to read it?" I asked. "You don't have to. I won't be mad if you say no. I can tell you what's in it instead. Or we can bury it in the backyard and pretend your daddy never had a thought he didn't say out loud." She laughed through her tears. "Mama," she said, "Daddy had a lot he didn't say out loud." "You're not wrong," I said. She stared at the notebook. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if he wrote something that changes how I see him?" "He did," I said gently. "It changed how I see him, but not in the way you think. It didn't make me love him less. It made me see him more whole." She chewed her lip. "I already know he wasn't perfect," she said. "I already know y'all had problems. I already know he pushed me too hard sometimes, or didn't show up for games, or snapped when he was tired. I also know he made the best grilled cheese on earth and danced like a fool in the kitchen. I guess I'm scared of finding out he was disappointed in me." "Oh, honey," I said, my heart clenching. "We all have that fear, don't we? That if we got to read the fine print in somebody's head, we'd find out we were a letdown." She nodded, tears spilling. "Did he write about me?" she whispered. "He did," I said. "He worried, he loved, he second-guessed. He regretted some things. He bragged on you in his own weird way." She smiled weakly. "Of course he did," she said. "I won't tell you it's easy to read," I said. "But I will tell you this. If there's any disappointment in there, it's mostly aimed at himself, not at you." She reached for the notebook. Her fingers trembled. "Can I borrow it?" she asked. "Take it home. Read it in my own time. I don't think I can sit here at your table with you watching me cry." I wasn't planning on watching, I said. I was gonna hide in the pantry. She laughed, a real one this time. I'll bring it back, she said. I know, I said. And if you want to talk about any part of it, my phone's on, day or night. She slid the notebook into her tote bag like it was fragile glass. I miss him, she said quietly. I know, I said. Me too. Maybe this is one way we can miss him together. Less alone. She hugged me, then left. I stood at the window and watched her walk to her car, carrying more of her daddy than she'd had when she arrived. Later that week, my son David came by to fix a leaky faucet. We'd been on shakier ground than I liked since Earl died, if I'm honest. He'd been the one pushing about the will, about the house, about mackin' sure things are fair. Fair had felt like a knife in my gut back then. He'd said things in that lawyer's office I can't forget. Things that made it sound like he saw me as a temporary occupant, a placeholder for his inheritance. We'd talked some since. He'd apologized, sort of, in a I was just trying to be practical way. I'd accepted, sort of, in a I know you're scared and greedy at the same time way. Love doesn't erase complicated. He tightened the pipe under the sink and sat back on his heels. That should do it, he said. Thank you, I said. Add it to the list of things your daddy used to do that you're involuntarily inheriting. He smiled. We wiped our hands. Lee told me, he said, straightening. About the journal, my stomach clenched. She read it, I asked. He nodded. Most of it, he said. She told me some, asked if I wanted to see it. And, I asked. He shrugged. I don't know, he said. Feels invasive. But also, I kinda wanna know what was going on in his head those last years. Especially about me. I looked at my boy. He was 42. Had a gut like his daddy, a hairline like my daddy, and eyes like mine. He also carried guilt like I do quietly in his shoulders. He wrote about the deed, I said gently. He grimaced. Of course he did, he muttered. I made an ass of myself. You did, I said, but you were also scared. He saw that, even if I couldn't in the moment. He blinked. He did, he asked. I nodded. He was mad, I said. But he also wrote about seeing your fear. About wishing he'd handled it better. About calling the lawyer. About wanting to make sure I was secure and y'all were taken care of. About wanting to surprise me at Christmas. David looked away. I thought he didn't care, he said softly. I thought he was leaving everything on autopilot, and I had to step in. I was so mad at him for not being the man I thought he was supposed to be about money. Guess I forgot he was also a person who was sick and tired and scared. We all forgot, I said. We were all scared. We all did the best we could with what we had in our hands at the time. Sometimes that best was lousy. He laughed once, bitter. Do you want to read it? I asked. The journal, I mean. He writes about how proud he was of you sometimes. You might want to see that with your own eyes. His face crumpled at proud. I thought he didn't see me, he said. I thought he saw all the times I disappointed him. The arrests, the job changes, the divorce, the everything. Saw all of that, I said. But he didn't stop seeing the good. He just didn't always know how to say it. He rubbed his forehead. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. Part of me wants to rip it out of your hands and read it in one night. Part of me wants to light it on fire so I never have to find out he thought the same terrible things about me I think about myself at 3 a.m. I put my hand on his arm. You don't have to decide today, I said. It's not going anywhere. It sat in that drawer 2 years. It can sit a little longer, he nodded. Did you read any parts about us? He asked quietly. About me and you, a few, I said. He wrote about our fights, about your temper, about my stubbornness, about feeling stuck in the middle. Of course, he said. That was his favorite spot, middleman. He also wrote, I added, that he hoped one day, after he was gone, we'd find our way to talking without needing him to translate. That we'd remember we're on the same team. David's eyes filled. He wrote that, he whispered. I nodded. he said, voice rough. I guess we owe him that much. We stood in the kitchen, 2 generations of stubborn emotions hanging between us like steam. Look, I said, you and I may never agree about what happened at that lawyer's office. I'm always going to remember how it felt to hear my son talk about my house like I'd already died. You're always going to remember how scared you were looking at those bank statements. But we can decide not to let those memories be the only ones we feed. He nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, we didn't hug. We're still learning that part. But when he left, he kissed my cheek a little longer than usual. I want to read it, he said at the door. Just not yet. I'll keep it safe, I said. I don't think everybody should read their late spouse's private writings. There's no moral law about it. Some things are better left between a person and their God. Some journals hold venom, hidden lives, confessions that would only cause harm to the living. If that's the case, you have every right to toss it in the fire and walk away. My situation was different. What I found in that blue notebook wasn't betrayal. It was a bridge, not a perfect one. Some planks were rotten, some beams creaked, but it spanned a river I thought was impassable, that gap between what I thought our marriage had been and what it had felt like from his side. Reading it didn't erase the hurt. It didn't turn him into a saint. If anything, it made him more human, which, strangely, made me feel less alone. Grief can trick you into thinking you were the only one feeling deeply in your relationship, the one who cared more, the one who saw more, the one who carried the emotional load. Easy to turn the dead into cardboard cutouts, either saints or villains because they can't argue. His journal refused that. It said, no, ma'am. I was here too. I was feeling things. I was messing up. I was trying. I was scared. I was grateful. I was petty. I was kind. I was all of it. It gave me the gift of his complexity. And in doing that, it gave me permission to accept mine. Sometimes now, when the house is quiet, I'll sit in his chair with that notebook and read one entry. Just one. I'll let it sit in my lap like a small, warm stone. I'll think about how that day felt from my side, then hold it up against how it felt from his. Some days, it makes me want to call my kids and say, I'm sorry for that thing I did in 2004. They love those calls. Makes them feel validated. Some days, it makes me want to call my sister and say, thank you for talking my side even when I was wrong. Some days, it just makes me smile and remember the way he'd lick his thumb to turn pages, even when I fussed about getting spit on books. I don't read it every day. Grief needs breaks, but I'm grateful it's there. A conversation I get to keep having with someone who isn't here to respond. A chance to learn things I didn't know I needed to know. And maybe most importantly, a reminder that the people we love are always bigger on the inside than we realize. 300 word closure. Emotional wrap-up life lesson, house family metaphor. If you asked me what my marriage looks like now, I wouldn't point you to the wedding pictures on the wall. I'd hand you that blue notebook and tell you to picture a house. Not the neat, staged version you see in real estate photos with the right pillows and the counters cleared and nobody's underwear on the bathroom floor. The real house, the one you live in. For years, I saw our life together like the front rooms, places we kept tidy, the stories we told other people, the arguments we had where the walls were thin and the neighbors could hear. Reading his journal was like Bane, handed a key to the back rooms, the ones we walked past in the dark, the ones where he sat at 2 a.m. with his fears, so he wouldn't wake me, the ones where I stood at the sink with my jaw clenched, so I wouldn't say something I couldn't take back. Those rooms existed, whether I unlocked them or not. The journal didn't build new ones. It just turned on the lights. I saw the scuff marks, the cracked plaster, the little notes he'd scratched into the doorframe. June cried today. David scared. quietly brave and doesn't know it. And in seeing them, I realized something. Love isn't about keeping your house spotless. It's about recognizing that everybody you let through your front door is carrying their own secret floor plan. Whole hallways of history, rooms of regret, closets full of shame. Maybe if we're lucky, we get to swap copies of the blueprints before somebody dies. Maybe we don't. Either way, the lesson I'm talking from that notebook is this: say what you can while you can. Tell the people you love the kind thoughts before paper has to hold them. And when you can't, when fear or pride or habit keeps the words stuck in your throat, maybe leave a little map behind. A line in a recipe card, a note in a margin, a journal in a drawer. Not so they can find all your failings, but so they can see you were trying, even in silence, to build a home with them. Messy rooms and all.